Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are and the time of day that you're watching this presentation. Uh, the subject of my presentation today is related to digital twins, architecture, and verification and validation framework in precision medicine. Uh, I am Hamid Ghazawat, PhD student at University of North Dakota, School of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. Here is my email address, and all questions, inquiries, and feedback, please direct them to my email. Um, this work is copyrighted, and any use or reproduction other than personal use requires getting permission by sending a note or a request to that email. Let me begin by asking you a direct question. How many of you have been in ICU, intensive care unit, or have had a loved one admitted to ICU for, let's say, a simple insect bite? Could be spider, mosquitoes, or whatever insect could be. Although it's rare for spider or insect bite to end up in ICU, which is almost less than 3%, very rare, but from those that have been admitted, 29.5% of those patients were diagnosed to having sepsis, which sepsis means that the infection from that bite has spread throughout your body. It has got into your bloodstream, and if it's not treated quickly, it could get into your organs and shut down your organs one by one and could result in fatalities. So, although it's rare, but out of the 29% of those cases that have been admitted to ICU, they were diagnosed by sepsis. And then less than 20% of those that have been released, they have been readmitted to the ICU again, and some of them have had fatalities. So it's a pretty serious case. Is it preventable? Can we predict and prevent this from happening? Yes, it is. Although it's too early, but digital twins is really a game changer, and it's a solution in the clinical studies. The future of healthcare is here, so digital twins is really the next step in future. Now, what and how, I will discuss that in the next slide. So what is digital twins? It's really an evolutionary shift from static data that we have in the medical field that gets put into electronic health record, and later on, doctors and practitioners, they look at it and they make some decisions, to a data-driven simulation of system at hand in the real time. Leveraging continuous data stream from the IOMT sensors and systems, and in this case that I asked the question, ICU devices, is to create a profile of the patients, to be able to do analysis of that data, to do some trend analysis, to do predictive modeling, prediction, and be able to early diagnose and troubleshoot the issues that might happen, and be able to provide a solution as optimum as possible. And all of these without subjecting the patient to additional unknown treatments and treatments that we don't know what the side effects are. And if we know, due to the severity of problem, the patient has accepted the side effect, which he or she could have potentially prevented from happening. In short, patient-specific computational model is for continuously updating with real-time data and supporting simulation, and forecasting. That's what a digital twin application is. It's really an application with all these capabilities. And what is precision medicine? Precision medicine, intensive care units, they all require rapid interpretation of the data. So especially in intensive care unit, the data comes in, you have to make a decision quickly. So speed of data collection and data analysis is of importance. And there is variability across different patients. Each patient has its own way, its own interaction with medication, interaction to those symptoms. And so we need some kind of adaptive treatment planning that can look into all of these to do it. And what solution is best suited for this is digital twin. Digital twins is an application that you can customize and tailor the model and the environment, the setting, and all those, and be able to do those prediction with additional data that you can get from electronic health record. The key to digital twins in medical twins are, at the heart of it is an ecosystem that connects data sources to the end storage, data storage. So as you collect the data, you store it in some kind of storage. And for this to be effective, it has to be able to connect all the heterogeneous devices and systems and be able to continuously stream the data, the procedures, the lab tests, the results, the radiology results, the examinations, all those things, and also genomic sources and all that data, be able to stream that data and make that data available in real time for this digital twin to be effective. And also be able to link that to databases and storages such as blockchain and AI prediction analytic applications that are already available. So digital twin needs to get hang of all this data and be able to do its own functionality, which I discuss in a little later. So this is the key to digital twin success. The characteristic of such an ecosystem, when I talk about ecosystem, it goes beyond just the digital twin application. So a digital twin is one application within the system of the sensor devices, data from all these different heterogeneous devices into some cloud databases and get some historical data, some trend data, and all those, and input it into this application, and having that application tuned and created and simulate that person, that patient physical characteristic, and be able to make that kind of prediction. And at the heart of it is that through this ecosystem, you improve the decision making by having a better data integration. Current limitations are that one is that there is no unified digital twin architecture. So if you look at the current implementation or any studies that are done, nobody has really given a unified architecture that can be common across all digital twins in a very hypothetical case. Okay, it's a high level architecture. There's a weak validation verification practices, limited real world validation, and also interoperability challenges that exist between the devices. Now, I did two sets of literature review. One was model-based testing in validating taxonomies, which I did that earlier for the midterm survey paper. In that, I define a taxonomy that categorizes this whole ecosystem. I'm not going to go through that. I'm going to focus on the second set of literature survey, which is basically focusing on digital twin implementation, shortcoming, architecture, and verification and validation. The purpose of this additional literature review was to understand and learn digital twin architecture and verification validation of that architecture, understand the work that has been done to define them, and understand what are the gaps and shortcomings of current studies and work. The methodology that I used to review these papers were to see what their findings are, what their conclusions were, what are the contribution of each paper, what's the strengths and weaknesses. So it was really a comprehensive review of 10 papers that I did. And what the overall review highlighted to me that is, while digital twins are rich in the conceptual maturity, so the definition is pretty, mature, that what it is, what it's supposed to do. However, the current implementations are inconsistent and unstandardized. So for a true clinically ready digital twins, in the case of our medical field for ICU, that digital twin requires standardized architecture. It needs a framework for validation. It needs a robust data interoperability, and then a hybrid modeling is common but are not standardized. And I talk about why hybrid modeling is needed. And most evaluations, based on this review that I did, most evaluations have been retrospective, that they're looking after it was done and say, okay, what happened, what was done. Whereas it would be a reactive and a proactive. So it's mostly reactive rather than proactive. So in the appendix, I have provided name of the 10 papers and the sources of 10 papers, and also a table of comparison of this paper. I put in my appendix, and for the sake of time, I will not go through those in this discussion. The challenges that I see from reading all these reviews are that, as I said earlier, there's no digital twin or end-to-end architecture that has been defined, no common architecture defined, no comprehensive validation strategy, and very few prospective validation studies that have been done. So what I put all this together, and I was thinking about it and say, okay, how do we want to characterize a digital twin? So digital twin is really an application that has multi-layer functionality. At the lower level, this application should have a physical and clinical environment connectivity. So it connects to the physical environment, to vital sign collection. It takes the current, heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, all that data. It takes the current treatment, how much fluid, IV fluid is being provided to the patient, how much antibiotic is given, what is the ventilation setting, and all that thing. And it takes the ICU equipment like alarm and movement, noises, sensors, EKG monitors, and of course, decisions that have been made about treatment of the medicine doses and ordering labs and all those things. So at the lowest level, this application needs to have access to this physical data. So that's what I call a physical environment. Then the data acquisition, it needs to be able to connect to other devices that are available, the bedside monitor, laboratory system, need to connect to electronic health record at the hospital, or any previous data that's been collected for this patient for trend analysis. So it needs to have access to that data acquisition. And of course, the interoperability become important. And then the data engineering side. Now that we have the data, uh, we need to be able to transform that data to some meaningful data. We need to be able to clean that data. We need to check the accuracy of data, correctness, and data provenance. Those are all needs to happen. So I call it data engineering layer. And then once we have this, we need to have some modeling. So at the heart of digital twin is the modeling. Now, the modeling needs to have two sets of modeling. One is the mechanistic modeling, which it models the environment, the physiology of the environment, the data, the machines that you connect to be able to, it's really the actual algorithm, the equations, and those that are needed. So that's what I call it mechanistic model. And then have the machine learning model, which it looks at the cognitive risk score, regression, deep learning, and things like that, which look at the other side, not just the data and mathematical models, but the actual behavior of model. So these are the kind of modeling. And then above the models, then you have the simulation. You need to simulate the reality. You need to simulate alternative version that did not occur. Because not only you need to simulate of what's happening, but you need to simulate what did not happen that you don't want it to happen so that you can prevent that from happening. Simulation of patient's condition in the future, what's going to be in the future, be able to simulate that. In other words, this part of it becomes the prediction, looking at the trend of today and be able to predict what's going to happen in future. What kind of intervention and therapy, measure, and simulation are necessary for this patient, and things that are not unnecessary. Okay, so all of these need to be simulated. And then once we have that, then all that data needs to be dashboarded and provided to clinician. So that's what I call it, decision support layer, or the UI layer, where the dashboard is provided, the risk alerts are provided, suggestion treatment is provided. And then based on that, all that data, the clinician, the doctors, and the nurses, and those make the decision for the patient based on this prediction analytic from the digital twin. So that's the functionality part. And then, of course, like any other system, it needs to have some governance and modeling and lifecycle management. It needs to be able to have version management, version control, audit trail, regulatory compliance, drift detection, because all this equipment, physical equipment, could drift. And also your model could drift based on the simulation that you do. So all that thing needs to be brought back into compliance. So these are the architecture, and the reliability of this is based on all these layers. They're not standalone layer. All these layers need to have some kind of cohesive data passing or connectivity. So what I call it cross-layer coherence. So that coherence has to be there. And of course, like any other system, each layer has its own fatality, its own failure mode. Traditional machine language validation is not sufficient because you need to have a blend of the traditional machine language, which shows you performance, robustness, fairness, and all those things, with the mechanism, which is really a model of the equipment and behaviors of those equipment in different situations. And then you need to model the clinical reasoning, decision on the actions that should be taken for the patient. These are all needed in your model. And so you need to validate each and every one of those. Consequently, the V&V framework is really hybrid. of these different layer validation of these different layers. So here is my second contribution, which essentially talks about first, you need to validate your requirements. Like any other system, when you start employing a digital twin for a specific case, what's the objective? What is the safety threshold? What's the data requirements, ethical constraints, on all those? Those are your functional and non-functional requirements that you need to validate. Then you need to validate each layer of digital twin architecture. You need to do boundary testing of architecture, data flow, safety constraint at the architecture verification, which is the low level. Then the data validation, accuracy of data, missing data handling, real world data, the model, you need to validate the model itself, identifiability of the parameter, boundary condition, and model calibration, robustness of missing data, subgroup fairness, really you need to validate your model. Then you need to validate your simulation. Stress testing of the simulation, mathematical modeling, mathematically model the simulation and be able to validate that. Output compared to the clinician expectations. So you need to look at the output, compare it with the expectations, and be able to validate that. Integration and system testing, validation of alert, device failure, fail-safe mechanisms, clinical evaluation. Now that we validate the actual digital twin, now how is it interfacing with the patient, with the real evaluation? For a while, it needs to shadow the evaluation, be able to do a pilot trial. And then lifecycle monitoring, post-deployment validation, drift detection, incident logging, version control, regulatory. You need to validate all of those. So all of these is really a framework of modeling. So what's the current work that's left to be done is really a complete and detail of this framework of validation proposal. That still needs to be happening. That's open area. And then the next after that is regulatory pathway, how we're going to, have ethical and regulatory compliance added to this. And then look at this digital twin as one application within the overall ecosystem of including integration into a layered unified taxonomy for patient-centric electronic health record ecosystem, which I introduced earlier. So those are some of the work that left. With that, I'd like to thank you for watching and listening to my presentation. I appreciate any feedback that you have, whether good, bad, or ugly, doesn't matter. Please provide me that feedback. This presentation is copyrighted and is available on YouTube. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.